The year is 1984, and Weekly Shonen Jump is about to be hit with a 1-2 punch that will forever alter the course of not just the magazine, but in the world of anime and manga. Hokuto no Ken, Fist of the North Star, and Dragon Ball both begin their serialization around the same time. One is a grim, violent, but also emotional post-apocalyptic epic, and the other was originally a gag manga riffing on Journey to the West that steadily transforms into a grand saga combining elements of wuxia and science fiction, all without losing its charm and sense of adventure. But these two series shared one thing in common. They both drew heavily upon Chinese martial arts movies. These films like Bruce Lee's Enter the Dragon or Drunken Master starring Jackie Chan were what helped define both series' defining features: their fights. No other manga was doing fight scenes like these two. Sure, other shonen mangas at the time had fighting in them. Ring ni Kakero preceded both back in 1977 with its introduction of superpowers and fights, but that was still in the confines of being a sports manga. Both Dragon Ball and Fist of the North Star were series where the fighting was not just a means to an end, but everything to its main characters. It paved the way for a brand new style, a brand new way of expression. The Battle Shonen, a culture built by combat. Thus, the floodgates of martial arts manga was unleashed. In 1987, Rumiko Takahashi creates Ranma 1/2, a martial arts manga that combines romance and comedy, and also confused gender identities, but we're not here to talk about that. In 1990, Yoshihiro Togashi begins his work on Yu Yu Hakusho, a manga that originally focuses on the paranormal, but soon combines martial arts with supernatural spirits, demons, and delinquent protagonists. Even JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, a manga that's now known for its complex stand battles that try to not rely on any physical involvement, started off as a manga that mixed supernatural horror with martial arts. And this extended far beyond just shonen, as in 1994, G Gundam premiered, eschewing the franchise's grim themes of war and the military in favor of martial arts and tournaments. Hell, because I'm practically contractually obligated to mention it anytime I have the opportunity to. Part of the reason why Kazuki Takahashi created Yu-Gi-Oh! Was because of the landscape of Shonen Jump was so battle-focused that he wanted to create a series that was exciting and engaging to read without having combat in it. But then, something changed. When Dragon Ball concluded in 1995, there was a subtle shift in how stories and fights were presented in the mangas of Shonen Jump. Manga series that were focused exclusively on fighting began to disappear, but the fighting itself didn't. One Piece, a series about pirates and adventure, was a manga with a lot of fighting. Naruto, a series all about shinobis and following your ninja way, was a manga with a lot of fighting. Bleach, oh, you get the picture already. Like all trends, the focus on martial arts began to fade away as its trendsetters finished wrapping up their stories. But what it introduced has never left shonen. If you were creating an action manga on Shonen Jump, you were now expected to have a lot of fighting, and for that fighting to take up a lot of the manga's time. Sword fighting works as an alternative, but no matter what kind of action series you were, there was now an expectation for highly stylized combat, and to have that combat be the focus throughout the series. And while that's great, it kind of left a problem. Shonen manga focused on martial arts just wasn't a thing anymore. Fist of the North Star and Dragon Ball left such a massive impact on the world of anime and manga that I think nobody really wanted to see if they could top that. So if you wanted a series that focused strictly on martial arts, then you have to either go outside the shonen demographic, or even outside the world of manga itself. The year is 2018, Dragon Ball Super has just finished airing and I am starting to hunger. I am in desperate need of a traditional battle shonen. No gimmicks, no fancy power systems, and no sappy melodrama. Just a simple but high quality action show, and I wasn't finding anything that could appeal to me. Keep in mind, this was 2018. This was peak My Hero Academia dick writing. Jujutsu Kaisen, Chainsaw Man, those were all just starting to come out on Weekly Shonen Jump. Hell, I remember this being the year where I bought a copy of Demon Slayer Volume 1, and while reading it was thinking to myself, oh, this might be big if they get a good studio for it. I think it did alright. But there wasn't anything that was current on Weekly Shonen Jump that catered to my tastes at the moment. I wanted a traditional martial arts manga that could be violent and over the top, but not have its main characters be gods throwing planets at each other. I wanted a manga with training arcs, different fighting styles clashing against each other, and character drama that can only be resolved with more violence. I wanted a series that could throw hands and throw nothing but hands. But there wasn't anything that could satiate that hunger. Until I found The Breaker. Now we're fucking talking. Released back in 2007, The Breaker is a manhwa, meaning it's a Korean manga, written by Jeonju Jin and illustrated by Park Jin-hwa. Previously, Ju Jin had written Ruler of the Land, which if I'm not mistaken, is currently the longest ongoing manhwa series with over 650 chapters. Now this part of the video regarding the creators is going to be a bit sparse, as there aren't that many interviews with the creators of The Breaker, and even fewer that are translated in English. But the main reason as to why The Breaker was created was that Ju Jin wanted to create a series that could appeal outside of Korea, and chose martial arts as his basis, and well, he definitely succeeded. The Breaker is one of the most successful manhwas of all time, breaking, get it, the boundary of what was to be expected of a Korean manhwa, and becoming an international success with translation for France, Russia, and most recently English being officially released. I read The Breaker all the way back in spring 2018, and I fucking devoured it. It was the right series that I needed, a simple underdog story told extremely and violently well. But that was over 6 years ago, and I've read a lot more manga since then. Which has me wondering, does The Breaker still hold up? Well, let's find out. There's no sugarcoating it. Shiwoon Leaves' life sucks. Every day in school, he's constantly bullied and beaten up. His parents are too busy working to take care of him, and his only friend is completely unaware of all the bullying and pain he's been dealing with. But this all begins to change with the arrival of his high school's newest homeroom teacher, Shunwoo Han. Mr. Han is at first glance your average slimy, perverted teacher who's only working there so he can creep out on all the high school girls and teachers. But one night, Shiwoo finds his teacher being confronted by a group of thugs in an empty alley, and finds that beneath his gaudy clothes and lecherous personality hides a martial arts monster known only as the Nine Arts Dragon. With no other choice but to either stand up for himself or die, Shiwoo begs Mr. Han to become his apprentice and to teach him how to fight, so that he can protect not only himself, but the things he cares about the most for the first time in his life. What Shiwoo doesn't realize is that the Nine Arts Dragon is more than just a cool title his teacher has, but a warning. A warning that the world Shiwoo is currently living in will never be the same again. At first glance, The Breaker's plot is pretty standard stuff. It's your basic weak kid learns to fight and stand up for himself against his bullies kinds of story that a lot of martial arts stories loves to use, and for good reason. It's a tried and tested formula that gets the audience to care about the protagonist immediately. Shiwoo and Shunwoo seem almost like stereotypes at first. Shiwoo is the unconfident everyman who just wants to be left alone, while Shunwoo is the classic perverted mentor who turns into a beast whenever danger approaches him. However, as the story continues, both are far more interesting than their first impressions give, but I'll get into that a little bit later. Ultimately, The Breaker is a story about defiance. That's where the title comes from, to break from what society and to a greater extent the world deems you as. The world labels Shiwoo as weak, and Shiwoo decides that he will fight against that label even if it means fighting the world, and the world he stumbles into is one of the coolest and most interesting worlds I've seen in an action series. But running parallel to Shiwoo, the world deems Shunwoo a monster, and Shunwoo not only accepts that label, but does everything in his power to prove them right. It's such a great contrast and just a small part of why The Breaker works so well. The reason why The Breaker's story succeeds is because of its simplicity, not in spite of it. It's got a cliched start and plays its tropes straight at the beginning, but once you start getting used to how the narrative is going to turn out, it does everything it can to subvert and deconstruct every martial arts trope you've seen, while also never losing sight of what makes it such a good story. It's amazing characters. Shiwoon starts off the series almost unlikable in how stubborn he is. He's got the classic male toxic trait of feeling he's the only one who can fix his problems, and to see him fail and fail nearly makes him insufferable. But when he changes, holy shit does he change. Shiwoon turns that stubbornness to refuse help into stubbornness to refuse that he can't get any better. Even when it's revealed that his body will never get strong enough to fight, he rebels against his own body and almost gets himself killed because death on the path to becoming stronger is a better alternative for him than to live one more day as a pathetic high school student who can't fight his own battles. It's crazy how Shiwoon goes from someone that I really didn't like at first to being probably my favorite character in the story. I think it comes down to earnestness. Once Shiwoon sets out on the path to become stronger, he won't let anything stop that. All that negativity he had in himself, the self-loathing, it just goes away because he realizes none of that matters anymore. He finally has something worth fighting for, something worth dying for, and yes, something worth living for. He will do whatever it takes to improve himself. He'll cheat his own body and even fight those much stronger than him to protect the things he cares for. And when he gets stronger, it's so rewarding to see because he didn't want any of this at first. He was just a teenager who just wanted to be left alone. He kind of still is that same teen, but the world wouldn't stop leaving him alone, and so he strove to become stronger, and it wasn't an overnight transformation. If this was a shonen manga, Shiwoon would have been kicking motherfuckers' heads off by the end of the 3rd volume. But he only became halfway competent at fighting at around the 6th volume. That's because Yeonju Jin is not afraid of showing his protagonist failing and getting his ass kicked over and over again. Shiwoon fails a lot near the start. He loses almost every fight he's in, but he still keeps trying. So when all that failure finally leads into success, it feels so much more impactful because we saw how the process has transformed Shiwoon into not just a stronger person, but a better one. But Shiwoon can't get any stronger if he doesn't have a good mentor to guide him, and Sun Woo-han is not just a good teacher, but a fantastic character in his own right. You look at him and think to yourself, yeah, I've seen this kind of character before, I've read Naruto or Dragon Ball, I know how it's going to go. But just as you begin to understand him, the Nine Arts Dragon flying kicks whatever preconceived idea you may have had about him. First of all, the Nine Arts Dragon is not just a nickname he was given, but a title he took from the world of martial arts. A title that not only showed his power, but also his danger. Sun Woo-han is the most dangerous man in martial arts because he is both the strongest man in martial arts, and because he has no leash. He is not bound by honor or respect, but revenge over his master's death. But to Shiwoon and the audience, he's just a grumpy but well-meaning teacher who's willing to help Shiwoon get stronger. And it's this contrast that helps build to the mystery of just who Sun Woo-han is. Is he a man, monster, or both? In my opinion, this just makes him so much more interesting than your usual mentor figures you see in martial arts stories. He's not some wise old master, but a dangerous outlaw who may not actually have that good of a reason for wanting to disrupt the world other than revenge. It's an interesting dilemma of whether or not we should really root for him. This in addition to him being the benchmark of the series, which I think was a really smart decision. Having the mentor figure also be the strongest character in the series is pretty common now in Battle Shonen, but keep in mind, The Breaker came out in 2007, so having the teacher also be the strongest character in the series was a novel concept, and I applaud Jujin for thinking that much ahead with how he wanted the series to go. But The Breaker is more than just those two. Characters like Shiho, Sosul, and Alex are all strong supporting characters who provide relief from all the intense fighting in the series. And as far as rival characters go, So-chun Hyuk is a pretty good rival for Shiwoo, all things considered. He's basically Shiwoo's opposite, born talented, born a winner, and everyone knows that. It's all set up so that once he faces the real world where he experiences emotions like fear and adrenaline, that he truly becomes alive. It's all good stuff all around, but what I really want to talk about is perhaps the most unique thing about the Breaker, what makes it such an interesting martial arts story, the Miram. The martial arts world, or Miram, is quite possibly my favorite aspect of the Breaker. The Miram is not just a group of people who have access to supernatural martial arts. It's an entire society of these kinds of people. Nobody knows how the Miram was formed or when it diverted from normal, regular society, but its ethics and morality differ greatly than what Shiwoon or the audience are used to. In the Miram, there is no good or evil. Concepts like revenge and social Darwinism are encouraged, and only the strongest are allowed to lead. It is so fucking cool. It's not only just badass world building, but a fantastic piece of deconstruction. How an entire society of superpowered martial artists would actually be a very scary thing, because their ethics and morality are so far removed from our own. Unlike, say, the Jujutsu Society, where it's at most a large group of people with cursed abilities, the Miram feels like a real society. We see hundreds of its members, we see clan leaders and their subordinates, and we see the values and traditions that they hold sacred. In my opinion, The Breaker does an excellent job at showing the clash between these two worlds, and as the series continues, these worlds don't just clash, they start merging into one another. Now, despite the action, the setting, and premise, I need to stress that The Breaker is not a shonen. First of all, it's a manhwa, meaning it doesn't have the same demographic that shonen has, and more importantly, the pacing is a lot slower. This is a slow burn martial arts story. The first real fight doesn't even take place until the end of the second volume. Some stories might have that slow pacing be the death of them, but The Breaker takes advantage of that by once again highlighting Shiwoo's growth. It takes ages for this kid to learn how to fight, and in the meantime we see over and over again all the bullying he has to endure. It almost makes the audience just as sick of it as Shiwoon is. In addition, this slow pacing is also used to help establish the Miram as a legitimate second society. We see meetings and conferences between its leaders, and all this goes a long way into showing that the Miram is both really similar to our world, while also being terrifyingly different. Now, this slow pacing is only present during The Breaker's first half, because once the second half begins, the series goes into overdrive. You will notice it like I did. It is so noticeable once the shift occurs at around the halfway point of Volume 6. And from then on until the end of the series, The Breaker just does not stop. Fight after fight. Plot revelation after plot revelation. So much buildup that finally gets unleashed. It's amazing, and when I reread the series, I did the exact same thing I did when I first read The Breaker and consumed all of it in a single night, and didn't stop until it was over. Now, I usually cover fights near the end in these kinds of videos, which is pretty ironic considering that a lot of what I cover is battle shonen, but in my opinion, the fighting is just what gets you into the seat. The characters and the story are what makes you stay for the whole show. But it would be remiss of me if I did not say that the fight scenes in The Breaker are not only important, but they're some of the best parts in the series. The Breaker's fights eschews complexity in favor of pure quality. There's no complex power systems or anything like that. Characters don't have hockey or domain expansions. All that's in these fights are people punching and kicking the shit out of each other. And I love it. I love it so fucking much. I love the impact, how every punch and kick feels so visceral, like you yourself got hit by these blows. And I love how almost every fight is high stakes. That first fight I mentioned earlier, yeah, it's between Shunwoo Han and the apprentice of the master that Shunwoo had killed before the series started. Shunwoo has just recently used all of his ki to help save Shiwoo's life after Shiwoo had taken the Sun and Moon Divine Pill to force open ki in his body. His opponent, Song Ji-ju, is a man out to kill Shunwoo with the use of his Iron Fist technique, a technique he has achieved its highest level of by foregoing all safety and using it at its full power, with zero regard for his health, because in Gi-ju's eyes, he's not making out of this fight alive, but neither is Shunwoo. Oh, and I forgot to mention that there's a fucking bomb set to explode in 10 minutes if Shunwoo doesn't win on time. And this is the first fight in the series. Things only get crazier from here. All of this shows that the Breaker doesn't have to have a complex magic system in it to deliver exciting fights. It just needs suspense and drama, and each fight delivers on that front beautifully. And it's here that I would really like to highlight just how fantastic the Breaker's art is. Jin Hwan's Park's art is fantastic, with each impact of a blow being further heightened by the usage of fantastic inking. Seriously, some of these spreads put some of the most popular shonen mangas of all time to shame. All of this adds up into an extremely engaging, downright addicting read that only made me want more when it was over. But all of this praise is not without some caveats, and the Breaker is not perfect. For starters, and this isn't just a problem the Breaker has, but a lot of shonen manga do, so I won't let it hang as a major issue, but the Breaker is really lacking when it comes to good female characters. Shiho and So-Sil are good supporting characters like I said earlier, but it's kind of a shame that they don't get much spotlight, nor do they do that much fighting, which in a series about fighting is kind of important. I wouldn't really harp on this too much if the only other female major character wasn't completely insufferable. Saihei, Shiwoo's high school friend, is, well, there's no better way to put it, is an utterly terrible character and love interest. And not in the, oh that's the point kind of way like she's a villain. She's supposed to be Shiwoo's emotional support and be what grounds him. That while he's getting all these crazy martial arts powers, his friendship with Saihei reminds him that he's still an average high school student. Except, nearly half the conflicts that show up in the Breaker are literally caused by Saihei showing up and getting into danger. This wouldn't be an issue if her personality wasn't a literal plank of wood. She is fucking boring, and so much screen time is dedicated to her and Shiwoo that's nearly unbearable. While I did say earlier that So-Chun Hyuk was a decent rival, I do think there was more potential to be had with him. Maybe I'm just spoiled on good shonen rivals, but So-Chun lacks the motion that a great shonen rival possesses, and his agency in the plot is unfortunately very thin. While I did say earlier that the Breaker uses its slow pacing to its advantage in showcasing Shiwoo's growth, I really do want to stress that this slow pacing may not be for everyone. If you pick up the Breaker expecting ki blasts and people punching buildings at the end of the first volume, you're going to be disappointed. Shiwoo, Shunwoo, and the Miram all take center stage so that they can develop, and this goes hand in hand with my last major issue with the Breaker, the underdeveloped villains. Now, not all the villains in the Breaker are underdeveloped. Shang-Ho is an excellent bully character who is such a detestable piece of shit that you are just biting at the nails waiting for Shiwoo to finally kick his fucking head off. But that's because we see him in action. The other main villain, the leader of the Miram Alliance, is not nearly as developed or interesting. All we know is that his fighting style is the same as Shunwoo's, and that he seeks the Black Heaven and Earth technique that the Nine Arts Dragon possesses. Other than that, he's just a generic power-hungry villain. Now, before I end this video, I need to talk about the second half of the Breaker, specifically the last 4 volumes. It's something I really want to talk about, and it's probably the best showcase of the series' themes, the characters, and the Miram itself. For anyone who has not read the series, here's the time skip you can use to skip ahead to my conclusion of the series. For everyone else who has read the series, let's go. Throughout the series, Shiwoo and the audience have a pretty clear grasp of who's good and who's bad. Shunwoo and Shiho are the good guys, the Miram and the Alliance are the bad guys. The Alliance is out to kill Shunwoo because he represents change, while Shunwoo is the unstoppable rebel who's trying to cause as much trouble as he can. But by the end of the series, the idea of who are the good guys and who are the bad guys starts getting a lot more complicated. We find out the backstory of Shunwoo and his master's death, and while that does sympathize and contextualizes his plight, it also casts some doubt into his morality. Is he really going to destroy the society's leadership just for revenge? Not helping is the fact that we get introduced to more members of the Black Forest, and well, they aren't exactly saints. Then we see some of the leaders of the Alliance trying to call for peace against Shunwoo directly, and Shunwoo immediately declines the offer. This calls into question Shunwoo's revenge plot. If some of these leaders can be reasoned with, then perhaps not all of them are bad people. Things only get grayer at the end when Shiho dies from gunshot wounds, and Shunwoo flies into a berserk rage where he loses all sense of control and starts fighting everyone. The Nine-Arched Dragon has finally awakened, and everyone who witnesses it will pay the price with their lives. And it's here that Kang Sung finally makes his presence known. Throughout the story, he's seen in various bits and pieces where the Miram is discussing business, but here's when he finally arrives. You see, Kang Sung is sort of the opposite of Shunwoo. Both are incredibly gifted martial artists, but Kang is a dutiful, principled man with a strong sense of justice, and someone who greatly values the traditions of the Miram. Kang Sung is such an interesting character to me, because if this story had just been a little bit different, he could have easily been Shiwoo's mentor. He's honest, kind, and thoughtful, possessing traits that not even Shunwoo has. But instead, he's forced into the position as the reluctant opposition to the Nine-Arched Dragon, a man he respects and wants to understand despite Shunwoo killing his master before the series began. But what nobody in the Miram factored was Shiwoo's presence. This is around the part of the story where I went from liking Shiwoo to really liking him. His earnestness and righteous belief is not just a cultural shock to the Miram, but a satisfying as hell refresher after all this moral ambiguity. But just as Shiwoo starts getting through to Shunwoo, the leader of the alliance comes in to ruin all that progress. Faced with the realization that Shiwoo is going to end up as a bargaining chip to be used against him for the rest of his life, Shunwoo closes off all of Shiwoo's ki. The nature of this act is very ambiguous. Yes, Shunwoo wanted Shiwoo to live a normal life and not be pursued by the Miram, but it feels like so much progress was undone by this act. And so, with Shiho dead, Shunwoo missing, and Shiwoo back to square one, it seems like the breaker kind of just ends on a dour note. Until you reach the last page and realize this is only part 1 of the story. Just as the breaker ends, the breaker New Waves begins. A sequel series set literally right after the final pages of the breaker, New Waves picks off where all the remaining plot threads set by the end of the breaker were left off. New Waves is special to me. Remember when I said earlier that I devoured through the breaker back when I first read it in 2018? Part of that was because of the last few volumes of the first part, and most of it was because of how much I fucking loved New Waves. I was no joke reading 3 or 4 volumes of it a day. New Waves fixed almost every problem I had with the first part of the breaker. Boring and underutilized characters, boom, 2 different but very interesting female characters are introduced as new main characters in the first volume. Issues with the slow pacing, the second chapter of New Waves already features heavy amounts of fighting. And now that the Miram has been established, there's no need to bog the story down with long exposition. And as for underdeveloped villains, New Waves poses a very different dilemma for Shiwoo. Was Shunwoo really his honest teacher who wanted to teach him to become stronger, or was he just using Shiwoo as his tool? If it's the former, then that still means that Shunwoo has abandoned his student. And if it's the latter, then that means that the real overarching villain of the series is Shunwoo. And at some point, Shiwoo will have to face his former teacher in combat and possibly kill him. Here's the thing though, as much as I would love to cover the breaker New Waves in this video, there's 2 obstacles that are in the way of that. The first is something you guys watching this video can resolve. If this video reaches enough attention and I get enough comments of people wanting me to cover New Waves, then I will make a video about it. The second and much harder obstacle is that starting next year, the breaker New Waves will be released in English officially for the first time, and I want to be able to read it in the newer translation as opposed to the kind of antiquated fan translation the breaker has. I alluded to this at the start of the video, but despite being a very popular manhwa, the breaker hasn't had an official English release until just a few years ago. For this video, I used Ablaze's translation of the series to reread it all the way through, and if you're interested in reading the series, then I highly recommend picking them up. It's got some issues with typos and missing letters, and the dialogue can feel a little bit dry, but overall, it's a very good translation, and buying it will show the creators that the breaker does have strong support in America. Even after 6 years and after countless other mangas that I've read, including ones focused on martial arts, The Breaker, in my opinion, still holds up really well. It's a very honest series that knows what it wants to be a story with amazing fights and equally amazing characters. For any battle shonen fan, this to me is a required read. And for those that aren't, I don't know, perhaps it can win you over with the unique world building it has. Like I said earlier, it's a very honest series. What you see is what you get with it, and perhaps its earnestness can make you consider reading it. Overall, The Breaker is a story that teaches not just Shiwoon, but to the audience that it doesn't matter how hopeless things can be, how much life seems to constantly be out to get you, and how it all seems so easy to just give it all up and accept defeat. If you stand up and fight for what you believe in, it doesn't matter how much you fail, you will never lose.